They say every man has a price. But what about a woman who's been sold 4 times before breakfast in the scorching heart of Texas, 1873? Grant McCade broke every unwritten rule of the frontier when he bid $20 on a girl he thought was dead. But the chains he cut that day, they were nothing compared to the ones wrapped around both their souls. This is a story about blood debts, buried sins, and whether redemption can grow in dust and ashes. Stay until the end and drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels across the world. The sun didn't just shine in Brazos County, Texas. It punished. It beat down on the cracked earth like a hammer on an anvil, turning the air into something you had to chew before you could breathe. On days like this, when the heat shimmered off the ground in waves that made the horizon dance like a fever dream, most decent folks stayed indoors. But decency had left this corner of Texas a long time ago. Sometime around the second year of Reconstruction, when carpetbaggers and cattle barons carved up the land like Sunday dinner. Grant McCade stood at the edge of the crowd, his hat pulled low, his weathered brown coat collecting dust. He wasn't here by choice. Hell, he wasn't anywhere by choice these days. At 34, he'd already lived 2 lifetimes, one as a boy who believed in honor, and another as a man who'd watched that belief burn to ash. The war had taken his youth. What came after had taken everything else. The auction platform stood in the middle of what used to be Dalton Square, though nobody called it that anymore. These days it was just the platform, a crude stage of sun-bleached wood where men traded things that shouldn't be traded. Horses, land deeds, debts, and on days when the law looked the other way, people. Next lot. The auctioneer's voice cracked like a whip. Young woman, approximately 20 years of age, suitable for domestic labor or... He paused, letting the crowd's imagination fill in the blanks. Starting bid at $5. Grant's jaw tightened. He should leave, should mount his horse and ride back to his ranch and pretend he'd never come to town. But his boots stayed planted in the dust and his eyes stayed fixed on the platform. That's when he saw her. She stood in the center of the wooden stage, barefoot, her dress little more than a collection of patches held together by determination and thread. Her wrists were bound with iron cuffs connected by a short chain. Her dark hair hung in matted tangles around a face that might have been beautiful once before hunger and hardship had carved it down to sharp angles and hollow cheeks. But it was her eyes that stopped Grant's heart. They were empty. Not sad, not angry, just empty, like someone had reached inside and scooped out whatever made her human, leaving behind only a shell that knew how to stand and breathe and nothing else. $5, someone called from the crowd. $7, another voice answered. The girl didn't flinch, didn't blink, just stood there swaying slightly, her bare feet dark with dirt, her lips cracked and bleeding from the sun. Grant's hands clenched into fists. This was wrong. Everything about this was wrong. The war had ended 8 years ago. Lincoln had freed the slaves. The Constitution had been amended. And yet here they stood in broad daylight, in a town with a sheriff's office not 200 yards away, buying and selling human beings like it was 1859. $10. A fat man in a stained vest raised his hand. The auctioneer grinned. Now we're getting somewhere. Do I hear 12? Grant's feet moved before his brain caught up. He pushed through the crowd, ignoring the muttered curses and sharp elbows. When he reached the front, he looked up at the girl on the platform, really looked at her, and his blood turned to ice water. On her left forearm, just below the elbow, was a scar, thin and white and shaped like a crescent moon. He knew that scar. He'd watched a doctor stitch it closed 14 years ago in a house that no longer existed on a girl who should have died with the rest of her family. Lena. The name fell from his lips like a prayer and a curse combined. The girl's head turned slowly mechanically toward the sound of his voice. For a moment, just a heartbeat, something flickered behind those empty eyes. Recognition, fear, hope. But it vanished so quickly, Grant couldn't be sure it had been there at all. $12, someone shouted. 15%, another voice countered. Grant's throat felt like sandpaper. $20. The crowd went silent. $20 was 2 months' wages for a ranch hand. It was enough to buy a decent horse or a used rifle or 40 acres of scrubland. For a half-starved girl who looked like she might not survive the week, it was an insane amount. The auctioneer's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. Well, now $20 from the gentleman in the brown coat going once. 22. The fat man in the vest wasn't giving up. Grant's jaw clenched. He'd brought $23 to town, his entire cash reserve after paying his ranch hands and settling his debts at the general store. If he spent it all, he'd have nothing left for winter supplies. But the alternative, leaving Lena Cartwright in the hands of that sweating pig of a man, wasn't something he could live with. $23. His voice came out flat final, allowing no room for argument. The auctioneer waited, scanning the crowd. $23 going once, going twice. He smacked his gavel against the platform railing. Sold to the gentleman in the brown coat. The crowd dispersed. Disappointed there wouldn't be more entertainment, Grant barely noticed. He climbed the 3 steps to the platform, his legs feeling like they were made of lead. Up close, Lena looked even worse. Her collarbone jutted out like knife blades, her skin was stretched tight over her skull, and when she breathed he could see her ribs pressing against the fabric of her dress. "Here's your key." The auctioneer handed him a small iron key on a leather cord, his smile revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "She's been trouble at the last 3 places that bought her. Doesn't talk, doesn't work, just stares at walls. But I'm sure a strong man like you can handle her." Grant snatched the key without responding. He turned to Lena, who still hadn't moved, still hadn't blinked, and raised his hands slowly so she could see them. "I'm going to unlock these chains now," he said quietly. "I'm not going to hurt you." She didn't react, didn't nod, didn't pull away, didn't do anything at all. She just stood there like a statue while he fitted the key into the lock on her wrist cuffs. The iron clicked open and the chains fell away, hitting the wooden platform with a sound like Judgment Day. Lena's arms dropped to her sides, dead weight. For a moment, Grant thought she might collapse, and he reached out to steady her. But the instant his fingers brushed her shoulder, she came alive, jerking backward with a strangled sound, her empty eyes suddenly filling with pure animal terror. "Easy," Grant murmured, pulling his hand back. "Easy now. I'm not—" But she was already stumbling away from him, her bare feet catching on a loose board. She pitched forward, arms windmilling uselessly, and Grant's instincts took over. He lunged forward and caught her around the waist, pulling her upright before she could crack her skull open on the platform edge. For one suspended moment they stood frozen, his arms around her skeletal frame, her body rigid as iron against his chest. He could feel her heart hammering like a trapped bird's, could feel every vertebra in her spine, could smell the sharp scent of fear sweat and unwashed skin. "Lena Cartwright," he whispered against her matted hair. "It's Grant. Grant McCade. Do you remember?" She went absolutely still. Not relaxed still, the way a rabbit goes still when it knows the hawk has spotted it. And running would only make things worse. Then she spoke, and her voice was like rusted nails scraping together. "Let go." Grant released her immediately, stepping back with his hands raised. Lena turned to face him, and for the first time he saw something other than emptiness in her eyes. What he saw was worse. Hatred. Pure, concentrated, burning hatred. "You," she said, and the word was a condemnation. "You're one of them." Grant started, but she cut him off. "I remember you. From before, you were there." Her voice was getting stronger now, louder, each word sharpened on years of pain. "You watched them burn our house. You watched them drag Papa away. You watched them—" Her breath hitched, and she wrapped her arms around herself. "You watched everything." The accusation hit Grant like a physical blow because it was true. Not all of it, but enough. He'd been 19 years old, barely more than a boy, when his father had led the raid on the Cartwright homestead. He'd tried to stop, it had begged his father to reconsider, had even drawn his gun. But in the end, he'd been too weak, too scared, too young to do anything but watch. "I know," he said quietly. "I know what I did, what I didn't do, and I've lived with it every day since." "Good." Lena's lips pulled back from her teeth in something that might have been a smile if it held any warmth at all. "I hope it eats you alive. I hope you never sleep. I hope—" Her legs gave out. Grant caught her again this time, lowering her gently to the platform floor as her eyes rolled back in her head. Up close, he could see the fever flush on her cheeks, could feel the heat radiating off her skin. She was burning up. Probably had been for days, and the effort of standing and speaking had drained whatever reserves she had left. "Damn it," he muttered, scooping her up in his arms. She weighed almost nothing, like picking up a bundle of sticks. "You couldn't have collapsed before I spent all my money." But even as he said it, he knew he'd done the only thing he could do. The only thing his conscience would allow. Even if she hated him, and she had every right to hate him, he couldn't leave her here. Couldn't let her be sold to someone who would use her up and throw her away like trash. He carried her down the platform steps and through the crowd, ignoring the curious stares and whispered comments. His horse, a patient bay gelding named Copper, stood tethered to the hitching post outside the general store. Grant shifted Lena's weight in his arms and untied Copper's reins with one hand. "Easy boy," he murmured as he maneuvered Lena's limp body onto the saddle. He climbed up behind her, settling her against his chest so she wouldn't fall. Her head lolled against his shoulder, her breath coming in short, harsh pants, even though she was unconscious. The ride back to the ranch took 2 hours. 2 hours of holding a girl who'd once been like a little sister to him, who'd chased his younger brother through fields of bluebonnets, who'd laughed so loud you could hear it from the next county over. 2 hours of feeling her fever burn through his shirt and wondering if he'd just spent his last $23 on a girl who wouldn't survive the night. The McCade Ranch sat in a shallow valley between two low hills about 12 miles southwest of town. It wasn't much to look at: a weathered 2-room cabin, a barn that leaned slightly to the left, a well that sometimes ran dry in August, and about 200 acres of land that was more suitable for raising rocks than cattle. But it was his bought and paid for with money he'd earned himself, not with his father's blood-stained fortune. Grant guided Copper past the barn and up to the cabin's front porch. He dismounted awkwardly, trying not to jostle Lena too much, and carried her inside. The cabin was sparse: a table, 2 chairs, a cold fireplace, and a single bed in the corner. He'd planned to sleep on the floor tonight anyway, so he laid her on the bed and went to fetch water and cloth. For the next 3 hours, he worked in silence, bathing her fever-hot skin with cool water, coaxing drops of water between her cracked lips, cleaning the worst of the dirt from her face and hands. The scar on her forearm stood out stark white against her sunburned skin, a reminder of the day everything had changed. She'd been 6 years old when she'd cut herself on a broken fence post. Grant's brother Thomas had been playing with her and had run to get help returning with their father and the doctor. Grant had held her hand while the doctor stitched the wound, telling her stories to distract her from the pain. Afterward, she'd called him the Brave One, and had given him a dandelion as payment for his services. He still had that dandelion pressed flat and brittle between the pages of his mother's Bible. "What the hell am I doing?" Grant asked the empty cabin. The walls didn't answer. Around midnight, Lena's fever broke. She opened her eyes, staring up at the rough wooden ceiling beams, and for a moment Grant thought she might still be unconscious. But then she turned her head and looked directly at him, where he sat in a chair beside the bed. "Why?" Her voice was barely a whisper. Grant leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Why what? Why'd you buy me a—" She swallowed, her throat working visibly. "Why'd you bring me here?" It was a good question. Grant had been asking himself the same thing for hours. The easy answer was guilt. He owed the Cartwright family a debt he could never repay. The honest answer was more complicated. "Because," he said finally, "I couldn't walk away. Not again." Lena stared at him for a long moment, her dark eyes searching his face for something, lies maybe, or hidden intentions. Whatever she was looking for, she apparently didn't find it, because she turned her face back toward the ceiling. "You paid $23 for me," she said flatly. "That makes me yours, so just do whatever you're going to do and get it over with." Grant's stomach turned. "That's not Lena I didn't buy you to." "Then what?" She pushed herself up on one elbow, wincing at the effort. "You expect me to believe you spent your last dollar on me out of the goodness of your heart. Men don't do that. Men don't do anything unless they're getting something in return." "Some men," Grant corrected quietly. "Some men are like that. I'm trying not to be." Lena laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You're a McCade. That's all I need to know about what kind of man you are." The words stung because they were meant to. Grant stood up suddenly, needing distance between them. He walked to the window and stared out at the darkness beyond the glass. "You're right," he said. "About my family, about what they did, about what I let happen, but you're wrong about one thing." "What's that?" "You're not mine. I don't own you." He turned to face her. "Tomorrow morning, I'll take you wherever you want to go. Another town, another state, hell. I'll give you the horse and what little money I have left, and you can disappear completely. But tonight you're sick, and you need rest, so just rest. That's all I'm asking." Lena studied him with narrowed eyes, like she was trying to solve a puzzle that didn't make sense. "And if I stay," she asked, "if I don't have anywhere else to go?" "What then?" Grant rubbed his face with both hands, suddenly exhausted. "Then you stay. You can work if you want to or not. You can leave whenever you want, but nobody's going to chain you again. Nobody's going to hurt you. Not while I'm breathing." "Why should I believe you?" "You shouldn't," Grant admitted. "You shouldn't believe a damn word I say. But in the morning, when you're stronger, I'll prove it to you." Lena lay back down, pulling the thin blanket up to her chin. "You're either the best liar I've ever met," she said, "or the stupidest man in Texas." "Probably both," Grant agreed. He grabbed a bedroll from the corner and spread it out on the floor near the fireplace. "Get some sleep, Lena. We'll figure out the rest in the morning." She didn't respond, and within minutes her breathing had evened out into the deep rhythm of sleep. Grant lay on the hard floor staring up at the shadows on the ceiling and wondered what the hell he'd gotten himself into. Dawn came too early and too bright. Grant woke to find Lena already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed with her arms wrapped around her knees. She'd found his spare shirt and put it on over her ruined dress. It hung on her like a tent, the sleeves dangling past her hands. "Morning," Grant said, sitting up and wincing as his back protested. Maybe he was getting too old to sleep on floors. Lena didn't return the greeting. She just watched him with those unreadable dark eyes as he stood up and stretched. "There's a pump outside if you want to wash up," he said. "And I'll make us something to eat. It won't be fancy, but I want to see them," Lena interrupted. Grant paused. "See who?" "My family's graves." Her voice was steady, but her hands were clenched white-knuckled around her knees. "If you're telling the truth about what happened, then you know where they're buried. I want to see them." Of all the requests Grant had been expecting, this wasn't one of them. He'd thought she might demand to be taken to the nearest town, or ask for food, or maybe even pull a knife on him while he slept. But asking to visit her family's graves, that hit different. "I know where they are," he said quietly. "I'll take you there after breakfast." "No." Lena stood up, and despite her weakness, despite the fever that had barely broken, there was steel in her spine. "Now, before I lose my nerve!" Grant wanted to argue, wanted to tell her she needed to eat, needed to rest, needed to build up her strength. But the look in her eyes stopped him. This wasn't about what she needed. This was about what she'd earned the right to demand. "All right," he agreed. "Now." He saddled Copper while Lena stood in the yard, her bare feet in the dust, his oversized shirt billowing around her in the morning breeze. When he offered to help her onto the horse, she climbed up herself, moving stiffly but refusing assistance. They rode in silence, the Cartwright homestead. What was left of it sat about 3 miles northeast of Grant's property in a patch of scrubland that nobody had wanted to claim. As they got closer, Grant could see the blackened remains of the house's foundation, the collapsed barn, the well that had been filled in with stones, and beyond that, under a lone cottonwood tree, 4 wooden crosses. Lena slid off the horse before Grant could stop her. She stumbled, caught herself, and walked forward with the determined gait of someone who would crawl if necessary. Grant dismounted and followed at a distance, giving her space. The crosses were simple, just 2 pieces of wood nailed together with names carved in rough letters. Jacob Cartwright, Sarah Cartwright, Thomas Cartwright, Rebecca Cartwright. Lena dropped to her knees in front of them, her whole body shaking. She didn't cry. Grant suspected she was beyond tears, but the sound that came out of her throat was worse than any sob. It was the sound of something breaking, something that could never be put back together. Grant stood 10 feet away, hat in his hands, feeling like an intruder at a funeral that was 8 years overdue. He wanted to say something to offer comfort, but what words existed that could make this better? Sorry. Didn't cover it. Sorry was an insult. I made these, he said finally, because the silence was crushing him. The crosses. After it happened. I come out here every few months to make sure they're still standing. Lena's head turned slowly. You did this. It wasn't enough. It's never enough. But I wanted them to have something. Wanted people to know they'd been here, that they'd mattered. Grant's throat tightened. Your father was a good man, Lena. He didn't deserve what happened. None of you did. Then why did it happen? She stood up, swaying slightly. If you knew they were good people, if you knew they didn't deserve it, then why did you let it happen? Because I was a coward. The words came out flat, honest, brutal. Because I chose my father over what was right. Because I told myself I was too young, too weak, too... He stopped, shook his head. There's no excuse. I watched them burn your home. I watched them beat your father. And when they dragged your mother and brother out, I turned away. I literally turned away and rode home like none of it had happened. Lena walked toward him, and with each step, Grant wanted to back up, but he forced himself to hold his ground. When she was close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her dark eyes, she spoke in a voice that cut like a knife. I was hiding in the root cellar, she said. Did you know that I watched through the gaps in the boards? I saw everything. I saw your father give the order. I saw the other men obey. And I saw you, Grant McCade, standing there with your hand on your gun doing nothing. Grant's eyes burned. I know. After everyone left, I stayed down there for 3 days. I was 6 years old, and I stayed in that cellar with the spiders and the darkness because I was too scared to come out. When I finally did, I found them. She gestured toward the crosses. They weren't even buried, just left there for the buzzards. Jesus Christ, Grant whispered. I tried to bury them myself. Did you know that I tried to dig graves with my hands? But the ground was too hard and I was too small, and after a while I just gave up. I left them there. I left my family lying in the dirt and I ran. Grant couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't do anything but stand there and absorb the weight of what she was telling him. A farmer found me 3 days later, Lena continued. Her voice had gone flat again, mechanical, like she was reciting facts from a school book. He took me to his farm, said he'd take care of me. He took care of me, all right. When I was 12, I ran away, got caught, got sold. Been sold 6 times since then, each time to someone who wanted to take care of me. She smiled, and it was the saddest thing Grant had ever seen. So when I ask you why you bought me, when I don't believe your pretty words about not owning me, maybe you can understand why. Grant forced himself to hold her gaze. I can't change what happened. Can't undo it. Can't make it right. But I can tell you this, I buried your family. After you left, after I came back and found them, I buried them. Dug the graves myself, said words over them, made these crosses. It doesn't balance the scales. Nothing I do will ever balance the scales, but I need you to know that they didn't stay in the dirt. Your mother, your father, your brother, your baby sister, they're at rest. That's not much, but it's something. Lena stared at him for a long moment, and Grant couldn't read the expression on her face. Then she turned back to the graves and dropped to her knees again, this time pressing her forehead against her father's cross. Grant gave her an hour. He watered copper from his canteen, checked the other crosses to make sure they were still secure in the ground, and tried not to listen to the soft, broken sounds coming from under the cottonwood tree. When Lena finally stood up, her face was dry, but her eyes were red-rimmed. She walked past Grant without looking at him and climbed onto Copper's back. I'm ready to go, she said. Back to the ranch? Grant asked carefully. Unless you've got somewhere else to take me. Grant mounted up behind her and turned Copper toward home. As they rode away, he glanced back once at the 4 crosses standing sentinel under the cottonwood tree. He'd made a promise to himself 8 years ago, kneeling in freshly turned earth with blisters on his hands and blood under his fingernails. He'd promised that if he ever had a chance to make things right, he'd take it. He just hadn't expected that chance to be barefoot, half-starved, and full of justified hatred. When they got back to the ranch, Lena slid off the horse and stood in the yard looking around like she was seeing the place for the first time. The cabin, the barn, the well, the fence line that needed mending, the garden plot that Grant had never planted because he was too busy keeping the ranch from falling apart. "I'll earn my keep," she said suddenly. Grant, who was in the process of unsaddling Copper, paused. "You don't have to—" "I'll earn my keep," she repeated more firmly. "I'm not a charity case. If I'm staying here, I'm working. That's the deal." "Lena, that's the deal," she said, and there was something in her voice that told Grant arguing would be pointless. "All right," he agreed. "We'll figure out what needs doing." She nodded once, then walked toward the cabin. At the door, she stopped and looked back at him. "Grant, yeah, I still hate you," she said matter-of-factly, "just so we're clear." "Yeah," Grant replied. "We're clear." She went inside and Grant finished tending to Copper, wondering how you were supposed to live with someone who hated you for excellent reasons, wondering if redemption was even possible, or if he was just fooling himself into thinking he could atone for sins that left 4 bodies buried under a cottonwood tree. But as he carried the saddle into the barn and hung it on its peg, he thought about the way Lena had said, "if I'm staying," instead of "when I leave." It wasn't forgiveness, wasn't even close to forgiveness, but it was a start. And in the harsh, unforgiving landscape of West Texas, sometimes a start was all you got. The first 3 days passed in a silence so thick you could cut it with a dull knife. Lena moved through the cabin like a ghost doing tasks Grant didn't ask her to do, sweeping floors that didn't need sweeping, washing dishes that were already clean, organizing supplies that were fine where they were. She worked with the desperate energy of someone who needed to prove something, though Grant wasn't sure if she was trying to prove it to him or to herself. He gave her space, kept his distance, spoke only when necessary, and even then kept his words few and careful. At night she slept in the bed while he took the floor, and in the mornings they moved around each other like 2 people sharing a cell, polite and wary and achingly separate. On the 4th morning, Grant woke to find her already outside, standing by the well with a bucket in her hands. The sun was barely up, painting the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold that would have been beautiful if everything else wasn't so broken. "Water's cold this early," he said, stepping out onto the porch. "If you wait an hour, the sun'll take the chill off." Lena didn't turn around. "I'm used to cold." Grant pulled on his boots and hat, trying to think of something else to say, and coming up empty. Finally, he settled on, "I'm riding out to check the fence line on the north pasture. Some of the posts are rotting through, should be back by noon." "Fine. There's salt pork in the larder if you get hungry, cornmeal too if you want to make Johnny cakes." "Fine." Grant hesitated, feeling like there was something else he should say, something that would crack through the wall between them. But every word that came to mind felt inadequate, so he just nodded, even though she couldn't see him, and headed toward the barn. Copper nickered softly when Grant entered, nosing at his pockets for the apple chunks Grant usually brought. "Sorry, boy," Grant murmured, running a hand down the horse's neck. "Didn't make it to town for supplies this month. We're all making do with less." He saddled Copper and rode out toward the north pasture where 3 miles of fence separated his land from the open range. The work was mindless, testing each post for rot hammering and replacement stakes where needed restringing wire that had come loose. It was the kind of labor that let a man's thoughts wander, which was both a blessing and a curse. Grant's thoughts wandered straight to Lena, to the way she flinched whenever he moved too quickly, to the hollow look in her eyes when she thought no one was watching, to the careful distance she maintained, always keeping furniture or space between them, always positioning herself near doors like she was calculating escape routes. He didn't blame her. How could he? She'd been sold 6 times, she'd said. 6 times passed from one man to another like property. And before that, she'd watched her family die. Before that, she'd been a normal 6-year-old girl who chased butterflies and laughed too loud, and gave dandelions to stupid 19-year-old boys who didn't deserve them. Grant's hammer came down harder than necessary, and the post split. "Damn it," he muttered, pulling it out and reaching for a new one. The sun climbed higher, the heat built, sweat soaked through Grant's shirt and dripped into his eyes. He worked methodically, post by post, letting the physical labor quiet the storm in his head. By the time he'd covered half the fence line, it was pushing noon, and his stomach was reminding him that he'd skipped breakfast. He was considering heading back when he heard the distant sound of hoofbeats coming fast. Grant straightened, squinting against the sun, and counted 3 riders approaching from the east. His hand moved instinctively to the rifle scabbard on Copper's saddle. The riders came closer, and Grant's blood went cold. He recognized the man in the lead even at a distance. Sheriff Marcus Dalton sat his horse like he owned the world, his silver star catching the sunlight, his face shadowed beneath the brim of a black hat. The two men flanking him were his deputies' brothers, named Colt and Wade Brenner, both of them mean as snakes and twice as stupid. Grant's jaw tightened. He considered mounting up and riding hard for the cabin, but they'd already seen him. Running would only make things worse, so he stood his ground beside the half-repaired fence and waited. Dalton reined up 10 feet away, his horse snorting and stamping. Up close, the sheriff looked exactly like what he was, a man who'd taken power during the chaos of Reconstruction and held on to it through violence and intimidation. His face was all hard angles and cold eyes, with a mouth that smiled even when there was nothing to smile about. "McCade?" Dalton said, his voice carrying the honeyed drawl of a man who'd never had to raise it to get what he wanted. "Been a while." "Not long enough," Grant replied evenly. Dalton's smile widened. "Now that's not very neighborly. Here I am making a social call, and you greet me with hostility." "You've never made a social call in your life, Dalton. What do you want?" The sheriff leaned forward in his saddle leather creaking. "Heard you made a purchase in town few days back. Young woman, pretty thing, or she would be if someone fed her proper." Grant's hand stayed loose at his side, but every muscle in his body tensed. "What of it?" "Just curious about your intentions is all. Man like you living alone out here, suddenly buying a girl off the auction block." Dalton's eyes glittered with malicious amusement. "People talk. They wonder what a good Christian rancher needs with a woman he's got to pay for." "People should mind their own business," Grant said flatly. "And so should you." Colt Brenner, the older of the two deputies, spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "Sheriff's got a right to check on the welfare of citizens, McCade. That girl's a citizen, ain't she?" "She's got more right to that title than you do," Grant shot back. Wade Brenner's hand dropped to his gun. "You calling my brother? Easy." Dalton said, his voice still pleasant, but with an edge of steel underneath. "No need for things to get ugly. I'm just doing my job, making sure everything's on the up and up." He paused, his smile never wavering. "You did pay for her legal and proper, didn't you? Got papers?" Grant's stomach sank. There were no papers. The auction had been illegal from start to finish, a mockery of the laws that were supposed to protect freed people. Asking for papers was Dalton's way of reminding Grant that he'd participated in something criminal and that the sheriff could use that fact whenever he wanted. "What do you really want, Dalton?" Grant asked, changing tactics. The sheriff straightened in his saddle and looked around at the ranch, the cabin, the barn, the pasture stretching away toward the hills. "Nice property you got here, McCade. Your daddy leave it to you." "I bought it myself." "That right." Dalton's eyebrows rose. "Funny, I remember your daddy having a much bigger spread before the war. Wonder what happened to all that land." Grant said nothing. Everyone in the county knew what had happened. His father, Colonel James McCade, had owned 5,000 acres and 200 head of cattle. He'd also owned 12 slaves and had fought for the Confederacy with the kind of zealotry that made even other Confederate officers uncomfortable. When the war ended and the world changed, James McCade hadn't been able to change with it. He'd spent the last years of his life drinking and raging against the new order, selling off land piece by piece to fund his bitterness, until he'd finally drunk himself to death in a saloon in Austin. Grant had taken what little remained and walked away. Started over with nothing but a horse and the clothes on his back. "You know," Dalton continued, "that girl you bought, I recognize her. Took me a while, but it came to me last night. She's Jacob Cartwright's daughter, ain't she?" The world seemed to slow down. Grant forced his expression to remain neutral. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you do. I never forget a face even after 8 years. She was just a little thing then, maybe 6 or 7. Had a scar on her arm shaped like a moon." Dalton's smile turned predatory. "That's her, isn't it? Little Lena Cartwright, all grown up." "Like I said." Grant repeated carefully. "I don't know what you're talking about." Dalton studied him for a long moment, and Grant could see the sheriff's mind working, adding up numbers that didn't quite balance. "You're protecting her," Dalton said, finally, his tone half amazed and half disgusted. You're actually protecting Jacob Cartwright's daughter. That's rich considering your daddy was the one who... My daddy's dead. Grant interrupted, his voice hard as iron. Been dead 5 years. Whatever he did, it's got nothing to do with me. Don't it, though? Dalton dismounted in one smooth motion and walked toward Grant, closing the distance until they were face to face. Your daddy gave the order, McCade. But you were there. You watched. Some folks might say that makes you complicit. Grant's fists clenched. Some folks would be right. The admission seemed to surprise Dalton. He blinked, took a step back, and then laughed, a harsh barking sound with no humor in it. Well, damn, didn't expect you to own up to it. Most men would dance around the truth, make excuses. I'm not most men. No. Dalton agreed, his smile fading. You're not. Which is why I'm going to give you some free advice, McCade. That girl is trouble. She's a reminder of things that are better left buried. If you're smart, you'll take her back to town, sell her to someone who'll take her far away from here and forget you ever saw her. And if I don't? Dalton reached into his vest pocket and pulled something out, a single brass bullet. He rolled it between his fingers, letting it catch the sunlight, then set it carefully on top of the fence post Grant had just replaced. Then you might find yourself on the wrong side of history repeating itself. The threat was clear as day. Grant stared at the bullet, his mind racing. Dalton had been a lieutenant under Grant's father during the war. After the surrender, when most Confederate officers had gone home to lick their wounds, Dalton had stayed in Texas and carved out his own little kingdom. He'd taken the sheriff's badge by eliminating the previous sheriff, though that had been ruled a suicide. He'd taken control of the county through a combination of violence, intimidation, and knowing where all the bodies were buried. Literally in some cases. I remember the Cartwrights, Dalton said conversationally, like they were discussing the weather. Jacob was a good man. Kept to himself, worked hard, didn't cause trouble. Only mistake he made was being in the wrong place at the wrong time, saying the wrong things to the wrong people. He spoke out against slavery, Grant said quietly. That was his crime. He said every man deserved freedom, and for that you burned his house and killed his family. I followed orders, Dalton corrected. Just like you did. Just like we all did. Your daddy was the one who decided the Cartwrights were a threat to the Southern way of life. I just made sure the job got done properly. Grant's hand moved toward his rifle, but he stopped himself. Shooting a sheriff, even a corrupt one, would mean the end of everything. And more importantly, it would leave Lena alone and vulnerable. Get off my land, Grant said, his voice low and dangerous. Dalton held up his hands in mock surrender. Easy now. I'm going. But think about what I said, McCade. That girl is a ghost from a past that needs to stay dead. You keep her around and you're inviting that past back to life. And trust me, you don't want that. He mounted his horse and gestured to the Brenner brothers, who'd been watching the exchange with obvious disappointment that it hadn't turned violent. As they turned to leave, Dalton looked back one more time. Oh, and McCade, you might want to ask yourself something. If that girl knows you were there when her family died, if she knows you didn't stop it, why is she still at your ranch? What's she waiting for? He touched the brim of his hat in a mockery of courtesy. Food for thought. The three riders galloped away, leaving Grant alone with the brass bullet glinting on the fence post and a sick feeling in his gut. He picked up the bullet and turned it over in his palm. It was old Confederate issue, probably left over from the war. The kind of bullet that had ended a lot of lives in those 4 years of madness. The kind of bullet that had ended Jacob Cartwright's life. Grant pocketed the bullet and finished his work on the fence in record time, driven by a sudden urgent need to get back to the cabin. Dalton's parting words echoed in his head. What's she waiting for? The answer came to him as he rode hard across the pasture. Revenge. Lena was waiting for revenge. She'd said she hated him, and she had every right. But what if hate wasn't all she felt? What if she was planning something, waiting for the right moment, biding her time until she could? Grant shook his head, trying to clear it. He was being paranoid. Lena was half-starved and barely strong enough to stand for more than an hour. She wasn't a threat. She was a victim, and he was trying to help her. Except she didn't want his help. Had made that abundantly clear. And maybe Dalton was right. Maybe keeping her here was just inviting trouble. But then he thought about the way she'd knelt by her family's graves. Thought about the 6 places she'd been sold before. Thought about what would happen to her if he took her back to town and someone else bought her. Someone like the fat man in the stained vest. Someone who wouldn't care about her pain or her history or the fact that she deserved better than to be treated like property. By the time Grant reached the cabin, he'd made his decision. Lena could stay as long as she wanted. And if that meant trouble from Dalton from the past from her, then that was a price he was willing to pay. He dismounted and led Copper into the barn, his mind so occupied with Dalton's visit that he almost didn't notice Lena standing in the barn doorway. When he finally saw her, he stopped short. She was holding his rifle, not pointing it at him, not yet, but holding it with the confidence of someone who knew how to use it. Her eyes were fixed on him, dark and unreadable, and for a moment Grant couldn't breathe. "Lena," he said, carefully keeping his hands visible. "What are you doing?" "I saw riders," she said. Her voice was steady, but Grant could see the tremor in her hands. "3 men. They talked to you for a while, then left. Who were they?" Relief flooded through Grant. She wasn't planning to shoot him. She'd gotten the gun because she'd been scared of the visitors. "Sheriff and his deputies," he said. "They're gone now." "What did they want?" Grant hesitated. He could lie, could tell her it was nothing, could pretend Dalton's visit had been routine. But Lena had been lied to enough in her life. She deserved the truth, even if it was ugly. "They wanted to know why I bought you," Grant said. "The sheriff, his name's Marcus Dalton. He recognized you." Lena's face went white. The rifle dipped its barrel, pointing at the ground. "Dalton," she whispered. "He was there. He was there that night. I know. He's the one who—" She couldn't finish the sentence, didn't need to. Grant knew what Dalton had done, had heard the stories, had seen the aftermath. "He's the sheriff now," Grant said, and the words tasted like ash. "Has been for 6 years, controls most of the county." Lena looked down at the rifle in her hands like she was seeing it for the first time. "I should have shot him," she said softly. "When I saw him riding up, I should have taken this gun and shot him off his horse." "That would have gotten you killed," Grant pointed out. "He had 2 deputies with him." "So—" Lena's eyes met his, and the emptiness Grant had seen on the auction platform was back. "What exactly do I have to live for Grant? What's left?" The question hit harder than a fist. Grant took a step forward, slowly giving her time to raise the rifle if she wanted. She didn't. "Right now," he said. "Maybe nothing. Maybe you're right, and there's nothing left worth living for. But tomorrow? Next week? Next year? You don't know what's coming, and you can't find out if you're dead." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer I've got," Grant admitted. He reached out carefully and took the rifle from her unresisting hands. "Look, I'm not going to pretend I understand what you've been through. I don't. Can't. But I know this ending Dalton wouldn't bring your family back, wouldn't fix anything, would just give him an excuse to come back here with a posse and burn this place down like he burned your home." Lena wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking very young and very lost. "Then what am I supposed to do? Just pretend? Just go on like nothing happened?" "No," Grant said firmly. "You remember. You carry it, but you don't let it kill you. That's what they want, for you to be so broken that you do their job for them." "Who's they?" "Dalton, my father. Everyone who thinks people like you and your family don't matter." Grant leaned the rifle against the barn wall. "You're alive, Lena. That means you won. They tried to erase you and they failed. Don't finish what they started." She stared at him for a long moment, and Grant could see her working through it, testing his words against her pain. Finally, she said, "He left something, didn't he, Dalton? I saw him put something on the fence post before he left." Grant pulled the brass bullet from his pocket and held it up. "A reminder." "Of what?" "Of what happened to people who crossed him. Of what could happen again." Grant closed his fist around the bullet. "He's trying to scare me into sending you away." "Maybe you should," Lena said. "Maybe he's right. Maybe I am just trouble." "You're not trouble. You're trouble for him, which is different." Grant put the bullet back in his pocket. "He doesn't want you here because you're a witness. You saw what happened that night. You could testify against him if anyone ever had the guts to bring charges." Lena laughed bitterly. "Who'd believe me? I'm nobody. He's the sheriff. You're Jacob Cartwright's daughter. That makes you somebody." "My father is dead," Lena said flatly. Being his daughter didn't save him, and it won't save me. Maybe not, Grant agreed. But it means something. It means your family mattered. It means what happened to them mattered. And as long as you're alive, as long as you remember, they're not forgotten. Lena turned away from him, staring out at the afternoon sun slanting through the barn door. When she spoke again, her voice was so quiet Grant had to strain to hear it. I don't know how to do this. Do what? Live. Be normal. Pretend like I'm not. She stopped, struggling for words. Broken. I'm broken, Grant. Whatever I was before, whatever I could have been, it's gone. And I don't know how to be anything else. Grant wanted to tell her she wasn't broken, wanted to say something comforting and reassuring and optimistic. But that would be a lie, and Lena had endured enough lies. So instead, he told her the truth. Then you learn, he said, one day at a time, 1 hour if that's all you can manage. You get up in the morning and you make it to noon and you call that a victory. Then you make it to sunset. Then you make it through the night. And you keep doing that until one day you realize you've made it a whole week, then a month, then a year. And then what? Lena asked. What happens after a year? I don't know, Grant admitted. I'm still figuring that out myself. She turned to look at him. Really look at him. And Grant felt like she was seeing past all his walls and excuses straight down to the guilt-ridden core of who he was. You really do hate yourself, don't you? She said wonderingly. This isn't about helping me. This is about punishing yourself. The observation stung because it was partially true. Maybe, Grant said. But that doesn't make you less worth helping. Doesn't make you less guilty either. No, Grant agreed. It doesn't. They stood in the barn for another minute, the silence stretching between them like a rope bridge over a canyon, fragile, uncertain, but connecting them nonetheless. Finally, Lena pushed past him and walked toward the cabin. At the door, she stopped and looked back. I'm making cornbread for dinner, she said. You can have some if you want. It was the first time she'd offered him anything, the first crack in the wall she'd built between them. It wasn't much just cornbread, but it felt monumental. I'd like that, Grant said. She nodded once and disappeared inside. Grant stayed in the barn for a while longer, tending to copper, organizing tools that didn't need organizing, giving Lena space, and giving himself time to process everything that had happened. That night they sat across from each other at the small table, eating cornbread that was slightly burned on the bottom and not quite cooked through in the middle. It was the best meal Grant had eaten in years. Dalton said something. He mentioned breaking the comfortable silence. Before he left, he said I should ask myself why you're still here. Lena's hand paused halfway to her mouth. And I'm not going to ask you that, Grant said, because I figure you're here for your own reasons, and they're none of my business unless you want them to be. She set down her cornbread and looked at him with those dark, evaluating eyes. You're a strange man, Grant McCade. Been told that before. Most men would demand answers, would want to know my intentions, my plans, what I'm thinking every minute. I'm not most men. No, Lena agreed softly. You're not. She picked up her cornbread again, took a bite, and chewed thoughtfully. I'm staying because I don't have anywhere else to go. That's the truth of it. Not because I forgive you, I don't. Not because I trust you, I don't do that either, but because every other option is worse. That's fair, Grant said. And maybe... She hesitated, then continued. Maybe because I want to understand. Why you did what you did. Why you didn't stop them. Why you're helping me now. I can tell you all that, Grant offered. If you want to know. Not yet, Lena said quickly. I'm not ready yet, but someday. Maybe. Whenever you're ready, Grant promised. I'll answer any question you want to ask. They finished their meal in silence, and afterward Lena washed the dishes while Grant checked the locks on the doors and windows, something he'd started doing since Dalton's visit. When he came back inside, he found her standing by the window, staring out at the darkness. He'll come back, she said without turning around. Dalton, he'll come back and he'll make trouble. Probably, Grant agreed. Aren't you afraid? Terrified, Grant admitted. But fear never stopped anything bad from happening. Just makes you miserable while you wait for it. Lena finally turned from the window. Her face was shadowed in the lamplight, making her look older than her 20 years. Thank you, she said. For what? For not lying to me. For not pretending everything's going to be fine when we both know it isn't. Grant nodded, not trusting himself to speak. After a moment, Lena crossed to the bed and lay down, pulling the blanket up to her chin. Grant took his usual spot on the floor by the fireplace, using his saddle as a pillow. Grant, Lena's voice came from the darkness. Yeah, I don't hate you as much as I did yesterday. It wasn't forgiveness. Wasn't even close. But lying there on the hard floor with the brass bullet heavy in his pocket and the memory of Dalton's threat still fresh, Grant thought it might be the kindest thing anyone had said to him in 8 years. That's something, he said quietly. Yeah, Lena agreed. It's something. Outside, the Texas night stretched wide and dark, full of old ghosts and new dangers. But inside the cabin, 2 broken people had managed to share a meal and speak honestly, and sometimes that's all redemption looks like, not grand gestures or dramatic revelations, but small moments of human connection in the face of overwhelming darkness. It would have to be enough. Because morning was coming, and with it whatever consequences Dalton's visit would bring. But for now, in this moment, they had cornbread and conversation and the fragile beginning of something that might someday become trust. In West Texas, sometimes that's all the hope a person gets. The days that followed Dalton's visit carried a tension like the air before a thunderstorm, heavy electric waiting to break. Grant went about his ranch work with one eye always on the horizon, expecting to see dust rising from approaching riders. Lena moved through the cabin with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd learned long ago how to make herself invisible when necessary. They spoke more now, small exchanges about practical things, whether the well needed cleaning, if the chickens Grant didn't own would be worth the trouble, how much longer the salt pork would last. It wasn't friendship, wasn't even comfortable, but it was more than the hostile silence of those first days, and Grant took what he could get. On the 7th morning after Dalton's visit, Grant woke to find Lena already up and dressed, standing by the door with his rifle in her hands again. His heart jumped into his throat. Lena, what? There's someone out by the fence line, she said quietly, not taking her eyes off the window. Been there for about 10 minutes, just standing there watching the house. Grant was on his feet in seconds, crossing to the window and peering out. Sure enough, there was a figure standing about 100 yards out, barely visible in the pre-dawn light. Too far to make out details, but Grant could see it was a man, and he wasn't moving. Stay inside, Grant said, reaching for his gun belt. Lock the door after me. Don't open it unless you hear my voice. What if I hear gunshots? Lena asked, and there was something in her tone that made Grant pause. Then you run, he said. Take Copper and ride hard for the Rio Grande. Don't stop, don't look back. That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got. Grant checked his revolver, made sure all 6 chambers were loaded. Promise me, Lena, if things go bad, you run. She looked at him for a long moment, her face unreadable. I don't make promises I can't keep. It would have to do. Grant stepped out onto the porch, letting the door close behind him, and heard the bolt slide home as Lena locked it. The morning air was cool, almost cold, carrying the smell of sage and dust. The sky was just starting to lighten, in the east painting everything in shades of gray and shadow. The figure by the fence hadn't moved. Grant walked toward it slowly, his right hand resting on his gun. As he got closer, details emerged from the darkness. The man was tall, thin, wearing clothes that had seen better days. His face was weathered and worn, with a scraggly beard that had more gray than black. He stood with his hands visible, empty, held slightly away from his body. When Grant was 30 feet away, close enough to see the man's eyes, but far enough to draw if needed, he stopped. You're on private property. I know, the man said. His voice was rough, like he hadn't used it in a while. Didn't mean to alarm you, just wanted to talk. Most people knock on the door. Most people aren't trying to avoid being seen from the road. The man gestured vaguely toward the main trail that ran past Grant's property about a quarter mile to the south. Name's William Garrett. I knew Jacob Cartwright. Grant's hand tightened on his gun. That right? Fought with him during the war. Different regiment, but we crossed paths a few times. He was a good man, one of the few who actually believed in what we were fighting for. Garrett paused. Heard his daughter might be here. Where'd you hear that? Town talk, you know how it is. Man buys a girl off an auction block, people notice. Man like you, especially son of Colonel McCade, keeping his head down trying to make an honest living. Garrett took a step forward, and Grant's gun was halfway out of its holster before the older man stopped. Easy. I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here because if that girl really is Lena Cartwright, she deserves to know some things about her father. What kind of things? Garrett's eyes went distant, looking at something only he could see. Things that got him killed. Things that might get her killed too if the wrong people find out she's alive. Grant's mind raced. This could be a trap, some scheme of Dalton's to draw out information, but something about Garrett's manner, the weariness in his voice, rang true. Why should I believe you? You shouldn't, Garrett said bluntly. You shouldn't trust a stranger who shows up at dawn making cryptic warnings. But I'll tell you something, only someone who knew Jacob would know. He had a pocket watch silver with his initials on the back. Inside the case there was an inscription. Time passes, truth remains. His wife gave it to him on their wedding day. Grant felt the blood drain from his face. Lena had shown him that watch the night of the storm, had held it like it was the most precious thing in the world. How do you know that? Because I was there when Sarah gave it to him. I was best man at their wedding. Garrett's expression softened. Let me talk to her, McCade. 5 minutes. If she tells me to leave after that, I'll go and you'll never see me again. Against every instinct screaming at him to refuse, Grant found himself nodding. Wait here. He walked back to the cabin, acutely aware of Garrett's eyes on his back. When he reached the door, he knocked. Lena, it's me. I'm coming in. The bolt slid back and the door opened a crack. Lena's face appeared in the gap, pale and tense. Who is he? Says his name is William Garrett. Says he knew your father during the war. Says he has information about what happened. Lena's breath caught. It could be a lie. Could be, Grant agreed. But he knew about your father's watch, knew about the inscription inside. The door opened wider. Lena stood there with the rifle still in her hands, her knuckles white around the stock. What inscription, Time passes, truth remains. Grant quoted. He said your mother gave the watch to your father on their wedding day. Tears sprang to Lena's eyes. She did? She whispered. How would he know that? Says he was best man at the wedding. Lena pushed past Grant onto the porch, staring out at the figure by the fence. Even from this distance, Grant could see her trembling. Bring him here, she said, if he tries anything. I'll put him down before he gets 2 steps, Grant promised. He walked back to Garrett and gestured toward the cabin. She'll see you, but I'm going to search you first, and if I find so much as a knife, this conversation's over. Garrett submitted to the search without complaint, holding his arms out while Grant patted him down. No weapons, just a nearly empty leather pouch that held some jerky and a handful of coins. Grant stepped back and nodded toward the cabin. They walked back together, Grant slightly behind and to the side, his hand never straying far from his gun. When they reached the porch, Lena was standing with her back to the door, the rifle pointed at the ground but ready to raise in an instant. Garrett stopped at the bottom of the steps and looked up at her, and Grant saw his eyes go wide. Good Lord, he breathed. You look just like your mother. Same eyes, same stubborn jaw. Lena's face hardened. You knew my mother. Knew them both. Your father saved my life at Shiloh, pulled me out of a river after I took a bullet in the leg, stayed with me for 2 days while I recovered even though his regiment was moving out. That's the kind of man he was. Garrett's voice cracked slightly. I'm sorry I wasn't there when he needed someone to pull him out. I'm sorry I couldn't save him like he saved me. Where were you? Lena asked, and the question held 8 years of anger and grief. Tennessee. Didn't hear about what happened until 6 months after. By then the trail was cold and the people responsible had covered their tracks. Garrett looked between Lena and Grant. Can we talk inside? What I have to say, it's not for open air. Lena looked at Grant, a question in her eyes. Grant shrugged slightly. This was her decision. After a moment, she stepped aside. 5 minutes. They filed into the cabin. Garrett took off his hat and held it in his hands, turning it nervously. Grant positioned himself between the older man and the door just in case. Lena set the rifle within easy reach and crossed her arms. Talk, she said. Garrett took a breath. Your father didn't just speak out against slavery. He was part of something bigger. There was a group of us during the war, Union soldiers, who believed that when the war ended, we needed to do more than just free the slaves. We needed to make sure they got land, got education, got a real chance at building lives. Your father was one of the leaders. I don't understand one, Lena said. What does that have to do with what happened to him? Everything. After the war ended, the people in power, men like Colonel McCade, men like Marcus Dalton, they saw what we were trying to do as a threat. We were trying to redistribute land, give former slaves a stake in the future. That meant taking land from the people who'd owned it before. Garrett's expression turned grim. Your father had documents. Names, deeds, proof of who'd committed war crimes, who'd stolen from the Union, who'd kept slaves in violation of the Emancipation Proclamation. He was going to take it all to the federal authorities. Grant felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. My father knew about this. Your father was at the top of the list, Garrett said quietly. Jacob had proof that Colonel McCade had executed Union prisoners, had stolen supplies meant for field hospitals, had done things that would have gotten him hanged if the right people had seen the evidence. The cabin felt too small suddenly. Grant's head spun. He'd known his father was a hard man, a bitter man, but a war criminal. Where's this evidence now? But that's what I've been trying to find out for 8 years. Garrett turned back to Lena. Your father had a hiding place. Somewhere he kept all those documents, all that proof. He never told me where it was said it was safer if only he knew. But he did tell me one thing. He said if anything ever happened to him, the only person who could find it would be someone who knew the land like family. I was 6 years old, Lena said, her voice shaking. I don't remember anything about hiding places or documents. I barely remember what our house looked like. But you remember the land, Garrett pressed. You remember the property, the places you played, the spots that were special to your family. Lena's hands clenched into fists. Why does this matter now? My family is dead. Justice won't bring them back. No, Garrett agreed, but it might stop it from happening to someone else. Dalton's still out there, still in power, still hurting people, and he's not alone. There are others like him all over Texas, men who committed crimes during the war and got away with it because they were on the winning side of Reconstruction. He took a step closer. Your father died trying to make things right. Don't let that mean nothing. It meant nothing the day he died, Lena shot back. It meant nothing when they burned our house. It meant nothing when I spent 14 years being sold from one place to another like livestock. Her voice rose. You want to talk about justice? Where was justice when I needed it? Where were you? Where were all these people my father was trying to help? Garrett's shoulders slumped. You're right. We failed. I failed. And I'll carry that for the rest of my life. But that doesn't mean we stop trying. Get out, Lena said. Your 5 minutes are up. Lena. I said get out. She grabbed the rifle, raising it to her shoulder. Her hands were shaking, but her eyes were steady. I don't care about documents or justice or making things right. I care about surviving. That's all I've got left. Grant stepped forward. Garrett, you should go. The older man looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Grant's expression must have convinced him. He put his hat back on and moved toward the door. If you change your mind, he said to Lena, I'm staying at the boarding house in town, Mrs. Henderson's place, room 3. Lena didn't respond, just kept the rifle trained on him until he was out the door and off the porch. Grant followed him out, walking him back to the fence line. When they were far enough from the cabin that Lena couldn't hear Garrett turn to him. She's in danger, he said bluntly. If Dalton finds out she's alive, if he even suspects she might know where those documents are, he'll kill her, and probably you too. Why are you telling me this? Because I owe Jacob Cartwright a debt I can never repay. Because that girl deserves a chance at a life her father would be proud of. And because you're Jacob's daughter's only protection right now, whether you want that responsibility or not. Garrett reached into his pouch and pulled out a folded piece of paper. These are the names of the other men in our group, the ones who survived. If you need help if things get bad, reach out to any of them. They'll come. Grant took the paper and tucked it into his shirt. Why should they help me? I'm a McCade. No, Garrett said, meeting his eyes. You're the man who spent $23 to buy a girl's freedom when you could barely afford food. You're the man who buried Jacob's family when everyone else pretended they never existed. You're not your father McCade. Don't let anyone tell you different." He walked away, then heading south toward the road. Grant watched until he disappeared over a rise, then turned back to the cabin. Lena was standing in the doorway, the rifle still in her hands, but pointed at the ground now. "Is he gone?" she asked. "Yeah." She stepped aside to let him in, then closed and bolted the door. For a long moment they just stood there, the morning light streaming through the windows, dust motes dancing in the air between them. "Did you know," Lena asked finally, "about the documents? About what my father was doing?" "No," Grant said honestly. "My father didn't tell me much about anything, especially not after the war ended. He just drank and raged and blamed everyone but himself for how things turned out." "But you knew he'd done bad things." "I suspected. But suspecting and knowing are different." Grant pulled out a chair and sat down heavily. "If what Garrett said is true, if my father really did those things, executed prisoners, stole supplies, then he deserved to hang. And I'm glad he's dead." The words felt like blasphemy coming out of his mouth, but they were true. Grant had spent years trying to find something good in his father, some redeeming quality that would make the colonel's memory worth honoring. But there was nothing there, just a cruel man who died as he lived bitter, angry, and alone. Lena set the rifle down and moved to the window, staring out at the land that spread away toward the horizon. "I don't remember," she said softly, "where he might have hidden anything. I was so young, and everything from before it's like looking through dirty glass. I can see shapes, but not details." "You don't have to remember," Grant said. "You don't owe anyone anything, least of all, me. But if those documents exist, if they could prove what happened..." She turned to face him. "Would it matter? Would anyone even care?" Grant thought about it, really thought about it. The war had ended 8 years ago. Reconstruction was winding down. The federal troops that had occupied Texas were pulling out, leaving local authorities, men like Dalton, in charge. Justice for crimes committed during wartime felt like a luxury the country couldn't afford anymore. Everyone wanted to move forward, forget rebuild. "I don't know, Kit," he admitted. "Probably not. But maybe that's not the point." "Then what is the point?" "The truth. Just the truth, for its own sake." Grant stood up and crossed to stand beside her at the window. "Your father died believing that truth mattered. That documenting what happened, preserving the record, was important, even if nobody ever saw it. Maybe he was right." Lena was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "There was a tree. A big oak, maybe half a mile from our house. My father used to take me there on Sunday afternoons. He'd sit under it and read while I played. He called it our thinking tree." Grant's pulse quickened. "Do you remember where it was? Could you find it?" "I don't know, maybe. It's been so long and everything changes." She looked up at him. "Why do you care about this?" "It's not your fight." "It became my fight the moment I bought you off that platform," Grant said. "And before that it became my fight when I stood by and let my father destroy your family. I can't undo what happened, Lena. But maybe I can help make sure the truth doesn't die with you." "The truth?" Lena laughed bitterly. "The truth is that the world doesn't care what happened to people like my family. The truth is that men like Dalton win, and people like us just survive if we're lucky." "Maybe," Grant conceded. "But what if we're wrong? What if there's someone out there who would care, who would act on it if they knew? That's a lot of what-ifs. That's all life is, what-ifs and chances. We can either take them, or we can let them pass by." Lena studied him for a long moment, and Grant could see her working through it, weighing options, calculating risks. "If we do this," she said finally, "if we try to find whatever my father hid, it's going to bring trouble. Dalton will find out. He'll come after us." "He's already coming after us," Grant pointed out. "That bullet he left was a promise, not a threat. The only question is whether we wait for him to make his move or whether we do something first. And looking for documents that might not even exist anymore, that's doing something, it's better than doing nothing." Lena turned back to the window, and Grant could see her reflection in the glass, young, damaged, afraid, but underneath it all, still fighting. Finally, she nodded once. "All right, we'll look, but not today. Today I need to think." need to try to remember. Take all the time you need, Grant said. She walked away from the window and sat down at the table, staring at her hands. Grant gave her space, moving to the kitchen area and putting on coffee. While it brewed, he thought about Garrett's visit, about the names on the paper tucked into his shirt, about the implications of everything the old soldier had said. If Jacob Cartwright really had documented war crimes, if he really had proof that could take down powerful men, then his murder made a terrible kind of sense. And if Dalton suspected that Lena knew where those documents were, or worse, if he suspected that Grant might help her find them, then they were both living on borrowed time. The coffee finished brewing. Grant poured 2 cups and brought one to Lena. She took it without looking at him, wrapping her hands around the warm tin cup. "My father used to sing when he worked," she said suddenly. "Old hymns mostly. His voice was terrible, but he didn't care. My mother used to tease him about it, said he could make angels weep and not in a good way." A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. "I'd forgotten that until just now." "Tell me more," Grant said, sitting down across from her. "About them. About before." So she did. Slowly at first, then with growing confidence, Lena began to pull memories out of the darkness where they'd been hiding for 14 years. She told him about her mother's garden, about the way her brother Thomas had always stolen the last piece of cornbread at dinner, about her baby sister Rebecca, who'd laughed at everything. She told him about Sunday dinners and harvest festivals, and the time her father had brought home a puppy that turned out to be a coyote pup. Grant listened, and with each memory she shared, he felt the weight of what had been stolen grow heavier. These weren't just victims, weren't just names on crosses. They were people, complicated, funny, flawed human people who deserved so much more than what they got. The morning passed. The sun climbed higher, burning away the coolness and replacing it with the kind of heat that made thinking feel like work. Around noon, Grant made them lunch, more salt pork and cornbread, the limited menu of a man who'd spent his last dollar on freedom. "We need supplies," Lena observed, poking at her meager portion. "You can't run a ranch on nothing." "I know. Was planning to head to town tomorrow, see if the general store will extend credit until next season." "Will they?" Grant shrugged. "Sam owes me a favor from a few years back, but favors only stretch so far." Lena set down her fork. "I could work. In town. There's always someone looking for seamstress work or laundry or—" "No," Grant said firmly. "You're not going back to town." "Why not? I'm not afraid of work." "It's not about work. It's about Dalton. You go to town, he sees you, he starts asking questions we can't answer. Better you stay out of sight." "So what am I supposed to do, hide here forever?" "No, just until we figure out our next move." Grant pushed his plate away. "Besides, if we're going looking for that tree for whatever your father hid, we need you rested and strong, not exhausted from taking in mending for ladies who'll pay you half what the work's worth." Lena opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. "Fine, but I'm not just sitting around being useless." "Then teach me to make cornbread that doesn't taste like boot leather," Grant suggested. "Because I'm pretty sure mine's getting worse." That got a laugh out of her, small, brief, but genuine. It was the first time Grant had heard her laugh, and the sound of it hit him like a physical thing, warm and unexpected and altogether too brief. They spent the afternoon on small tasks around the ranch. Lena showed Grant how to properly mix cornmeal batter, how to tell when the pan was hot enough, how to test for doneness. In return, Grant taught her how to clean and oil the rifles, how to load them properly, how to aim for center mass rather than trying for fancy headshots. "If you ever have to shoot someone," he told her, "you aim for the biggest target. Don't try to wound, don't try to scare. You shoot to stop the threat." "Have you ever shot anyone?" Lena asked, sighting down the barrel at an imaginary target. 3 times. Twice during the war, once after. All 3 times I had nightmares for months. Grant took the rifle from her and set it aside. "Killing a man changes you, makes you see death in every shadow. You become a different person after, and you never get back who you were before. What if that person needed killing? Doesn't matter, you still carry it, still see their face when you close your eyes, still wonder if there was another way." He met her gaze. "If it comes to that, if you have to shoot to protect yourself, you do it. But don't fool yourself into thinking it won't cost you something." Lena nodded slowly. "My father told me something once before everything happened. He said the measure of a man isn't whether he can kill, but whether he can choose not to when he has the chance." Your father was smarter than most, Grant said. Smarter than me, certainly. As the sun started its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, they sat on the porch together. It had become a habit over the past few days, this evening ritual of watching the day end. Neither of them spoke, but the silence was comfortable now, companionable even. I remember more now, Lena said as the last light faded. About the tree. It was near a creek, I think, and there were rocks nearby, big ones arranged in a circle. My father said they were old, that Indians had put them there long before we came. I know that place, Grant said slowly. Or I think I do. There's a creek about 3 miles northeast of where your house was. Haven't been there in years, but I remember seeing stone circles when I was a kid. When do we go? Tomorrow, early, before the heat sets in and before anyone's likely to see us riding that way. Grant stood up and stretched. Get some rest tonight. It'll be a long day. They went inside as full darkness fell. Grant lit a lamp and checked the bolt on the door one more time, a habit he couldn't seem to break. Lena climbed into bed and pulled the blanket up. Grant, she called out as he was settling onto his usual spot on the floor. Yeah. Thank you for listening today, for letting me remember them out loud. Anytime, Grant said. They deserve to be remembered. So do you, Lena said quietly. For what you're trying to do. For trying to make it right. Grant didn't know how to respond to that, so he just nodded in the darkness and closed his eyes. Outside, night birds called to each other. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. And in the cabin, 2 people who had every reason to hate each other slept under the same roof, united by ghosts and guilt and the fragile hope that somewhere out there the truth was waiting to be found. Tomorrow, they would ride out to find it. Tomorrow, they would take the first real step toward either redemption or destruction. But tonight, for these few quiet hours, they had peace. It wouldn't last. Grant knew that as surely as he knew the sun would rise. But that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight was for rest, for gathering strength, for preparing for whatever came next. Because in the harsh reality of West Texas in 1873, peace was always temporary and trouble was always just over the next rise. But that didn't mean you stopped reaching for the light, even when darkness was all you could see. Dawn came soft and gray, the kind of morning where the world seemed to be holding its breath. Grant woke to find Lena already up, standing by the window with her arms wrapped around herself, staring out at the lightening sky. He could tell by the tension in her shoulders that she hadn't slept much, if at all. Second thoughts? He asked quietly, sitting up and reaching for his boots. About 100 of them, Lena admitted without turning around. But we're still going. They prepared in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Grant checked their supplies, 2 canteens of water, some jerky, the rifle's extra ammunition. Lena braided her hair back tight against her skull, the way she'd worn it on the auction platform, and Grant realized it was armor of a sort. When you expected trouble, you made sure nothing could be grabbed, nothing could get in your way. By the time the sun broke the horizon, they were mounted on Copper and heading northeast, following terrain that Grant knew like the lines on his own hands. The land here was harder than his property, more rock than soil, dotted with mesquite and prickly pear. Beautiful in its own harsh way, but unforgiving to anyone who didn't respect it. Lena rode in front of him, her body rigid with tension. Grant could feel her trembling slightly, though whether from fear or anticipation, or just the early morning cold, he couldn't tell. You doing all right? He asked. I don't know what I'm doing, she said. For 14 years I tried to forget everything about this place. Now I'm riding back toward it like it's going to fix something. Maybe it will. Or maybe we're just 2 fools chasing ghosts. That's possible too, Grant agreed. But we won't know unless we try. They rode for the better part of an hour, the sun climbing steadily, burning away the morning coolness and replacing it with heat that shimmered off the rocks. Grant kept one eye on their surroundings, watching for signs of other riders, but the land remained empty except for a hawk circling lazily overhead. When they reached the blackened ruins of the Cartwright homestead, Lena went rigid in the saddle. Grant felt her stop breathing for a moment, felt the way every muscle in her body locked up. He gave her time, letting Copper walk slowly past the collapsed foundation, past the filled-in well, past the 4 crosses under the cottonwood tree. I'm all right, Lena said, though her voice shook. Keep going. They continued northeast, following what had once been a path, but was now just a suggestion in the scrub. The land rose slightly, then dipped into a shallow draw where a creek ran when the rains came. This late in the season, it was mostly dry, just pools of water in the deeper spots. But the line of trees that followed it stood as testament to where water lived beneath the surface. "There," Lena said suddenly, pointing. "Those rocks." Grant saw them, a circle of large stones, each one about knee-high, arranged in a pattern that was clearly deliberate. Time and weather had shifted some of them, but the circle was still recognizable. And beyond it, standing alone on a slight rise, was the tree. It was massive, its trunk easily 6 feet across its branches, spreading wide enough to shade a dozen people. The bark was gnarled and scarred, testament to decades of storms and seasons. It looked ancient, permanent, like it had been there since the beginning of time and would be there at the end. Grant dismounted and helped Lena down, though she brushed off his hands as soon as her feet touched the ground. Together they walked toward the tree, their boots crunching on the dry grass and scattered acorns. "I used to climb it," Lena said softly. "There was a branch, that one, I think, that came out low enough for me to reach. Papa would boost me up, and I'd climb as high as I dared. He'd stand at the bottom and tell me stories about the people who'd lived here before us, the ones who'd made the stone circle." They reached the tree, and Lena placed her hand on the trunk, her fingers tracing the deep grooves in the bark. Grant watched her face, saw the memories playing across it like shadows. "He wouldn't have buried anything," she said, thinking out loud. "Too easy for someone to dig up. And he wouldn't have put it somewhere obvious. It would have to be—" She stopped, her eyes going wide. "The tree itself." "What do you mean?" Lena moved around the trunk, examining it carefully. "There, see that hollow, about 8 feet up where the branch split off?" She pointed to a dark opening in the trunk, partially obscured by a fold of bark. "Papa used to tell me that's where the tree kept its secrets. I thought he was just making up stories." Grant studied the hollow. It was well above his head, but not impossible to reach if someone was determined. Could be animals living in there: snakes, raccoons, wasps. Only one way to find out. Lena grabbed the lowest branch and started to pull herself up. "Wait, let me—" Grant started, but she was already climbing, moving with the easy confidence of someone who'd done this 1,000 times as a child. Within seconds, she'd reached the split and was peering into the hollow, her arm disappearing inside up to her shoulder. Grant held his breath. This was it. Either Jacob Cartwright had hidden his evidence here, or they were wasting their time chasing memories and maybes. Lena's face changed. Her eyes went wide, her mouth opening in surprise. When she pulled her arm out, she was holding something wrapped in oilcloth, stained with age but intact. "There's something here," she called down, her voice shaking with excitement or fear or both. "Something heavy." She climbed down more carefully than she'd gone up, cradling the package against her chest like it was made of glass. When her feet touched the ground, she and Grant looked at each other, neither quite willing to open it to see if 14 years and harsh weather had destroyed whatever was inside. "You do it," Lena said, holding out the package. "My hands are shaking too much." Grant took it and moved to sit in the shade of the tree, his back against the trunk. Lena sat beside him so close their shoulders touched. Carefully he began to unwrap the oilcloth layer after layer until finally he reached what was inside. A leather satchel, dry and cracked, but still whole. And inside the satchel, wrapped in more oilcloth papers. Dozens of them covered in neat handwriting, some with official seals, others just lists and notes. Grant pulled out the first sheet and read the heading. Testimony of Private Marcus Dalton regarding events at Millbrook Farm, April 1863. His blood went cold as he scanned the text. It was a detailed account of a massacre written in Dalton's own hand, describing how Confederate forces under Colonel James McCade had executed 23 Union prisoners who'd been promised safe passage. "Jesus Christ," Grant whispered. Lena took the paper from his numb fingers and read it herself, her face growing paler with each line. "There's more," she said, reaching into the satchel and pulling out another sheaf of papers. "Look at this. Supply manifest showing materials that were supposed to go to field hospitals but were diverted for personal profit. And this—" she held up a letter with an official Confederate seal. This is signed by someone in the War Department authorizing payment for slaves even after the Emancipation Proclamation. My father documented everything. They spent the next hour going through the papers, and with each document, the scope of Jacob Cartwright's investigation became clearer. He hadn't just been collecting evidence against Colonel McCade. He'd been building a case against dozens of men, a systematic record of corruption, war crimes, and atrocities that would have brought down half the power structure in Texas if it had ever seen the light of day. "This is why they killed him," Lena said, her voice hollow. "Not because he spoke out against slavery, because he had proof, because he could have destroyed them all." "And they knew it," Grant added, his mind racing. "Someone must have told them what your father was doing. Someone betrayed him." "Who?" "I don't know. But whoever it was, they're probably still out there, still in a position of power." Grant carefully rewrapped the documents and put them back in the satchel. "We need to get these somewhere safe, somewhere Dalton can't reach them. Where you said yourself the federal troops are pulling out. Who's going to care about 8-year-old war crimes?" It was a good question, and Grant didn't have a good answer. The world had moved on from the war, was desperate to forget and rebuild. But these documents, they were dynamite. In the right hands, they could still bring justice. In the wrong hands, they'd get everyone involved killed. "Garrett," Grant said suddenly, "he said there were others men who were part of your father's group. Maybe they'd know what to do with this." "You trust him?" "I don't know him well enough to trust him, but I trust that he knew your father, and I trust that he wants the same thing we do." Lena stood up, clutching the satchel to her chest. "Then we need to go. Now, before—" The crack of a rifle shot split the air. Grant's instincts took over. He grabbed Lena and pulled her down behind the tree trunk as a second shot rang out, this one close enough that he heard the bullet whine past. Copper spooked, rearing up and galloping away toward the creek. "Stay down!" Grant hissed, drawing his revolver and scanning the surrounding terrain. The shots had come from the east, from higher ground about 200 yards away. He couldn't see the shooter, but he could see dust rising where someone had taken position behind a rocky outcrop. "How many?" Lena whispered. "Don't know. At least one, maybe more." Grant's mind raced. They were pinned down on foot with limited ammunition and no cover except the tree. Whoever was shooting at them had the high ground and all the time in the world. Another shot, this one hitting the tree trunk with a solid thunk. Bark exploded near Grant's head, and he felt a sharp sting as a splinter cut his cheek. "We can't stay here," Lena said. "They'll just wait us out." She was right. The creek bed was maybe 30 yards away, with enough brush along the banks to provide cover if they could reach it. But that meant 30 yards of open ground with at least one rifleman drawing bead on them. "When I start shooting, you run," Grant said. "Don't stop. Don't look back. Get to the creek and follow it downstream. There's a place about half a mile from here where the banks get steep. Hide there, and I'll find you." "What about you?" "I'll be right behind you." It was a lie, and they both knew it. Someone had to provide covering fire, and that someone wasn't going to make it to the creek. But Grant didn't see any other choice. Lena grabbed his arm, her fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. "Don't you dare die on me, Grant McCade. Not after everything. Don't you dare." "I'll do my best," Grant said. He checked his revolver 6 shots and took a deep breath. "On 3. 1, 2... "Wait," Lena said. She leaned forward and kissed him quick and hard and desperate. "For luck." Then she was up and running before Grant could process what had just happened. The satchel clutched against her chest, her legs pumping as she sprinted toward the creek. Grant rose from behind the tree and started firing, spacing his shots, trying to make the shooter keep his head down. He saw movement on the outcrop, 2 figures, not one. Damn it! His third shot sparked off rock near one of them, and they both ducked. Grant fired twice more, then turned to run. He'd taken maybe 3 steps when something hit him in the left side just below his ribs. It felt like getting kicked by a horse, like all the air being driven from his lungs at once. His legs kept moving for another 2 steps, then gave out, and he was falling, the ground rushing up to meet him. The impact drove the last of the air from his lungs. Grant tried to breathe and couldn't, tried to move and found his body wouldn't obey. He managed to roll onto his back, staring up at the sky through the tree branches, and realized with distant clarity that he'd been shot. Footsteps approached, 2 sets moving cautiously. Grant tried to raise his revolver, but his arm felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The gun fell from his nerveless fingers and landed in the dirt beside him. Two faces appeared above him, swimming in and out of focus. The Brenner brothers, Colt and Wade, both grinning like they'd just won a prize at the county fair. "Look at that Wade," Colt said. "We got ourselves a McCade." "Sheriff's going to be pleased," Wade agreed. He kicked Grant's revolver away, then knelt down and pressed his boot against Grant's wound. The pain was extraordinary, white-hot and all-consuming. Grant heard someone screaming and realized dimly that it was him. "Where's the girl?" Colt demanded. Grant clenched his teeth and said nothing. If Lena had made it to the creek, if she'd kept running, maybe she had a chance. Maybe she could get away. Wade pressed down harder on the wound. "He asked you a question." "Go to hell, Grant managed through gritted teeth. "Wrong answer." Colt drew his revolver and pressed the barrel against Grant's forehead. The metal was hot from firing, and Grant felt his skin blister. "Last chance. Where'd she go?" Grant tried to spit in his face, but didn't have the moisture. His vision was starting to gray at the edges, his body going cold despite the heat. He'd lost too much blood, was losing more with every second. If the Brenner brothers wanted information, they'd better ask quick, because he didn't have much time left. "Leave him alone." The shout came from the direction of the creek. All three of them, Grant and the two deputies, turned to look. Lena stood 30 yards away, the satchel at her feet, Grant's rifle in her hands, the barrel pointed directly at the Brenner brothers. "No," Grant whispered. "Run. Please run." But Lena wasn't running. She was advancing, the rifle steady in her hands, her face a mask of cold fury. "Step away from him. Now!" Colt laughed. "Little girl, do you even know how to use that thing?" "Let's find out," Lena said, and fired. The bullet hit Colt in the shoulder, spinning him around. He screamed and dropped his gun, clutching at the wound. Wade started to raise his own weapon, and Lena worked the rifle bolt and fired again. This shot went wide, kicking up dirt 3 feet to Wade's left, but it was close enough to make him dive for cover. Lena ran forward, still firing, not aiming now, just trying to keep them down. She reached Grant and dropped to her knees beside him, the rifle falling away as she pressed both hands against his wound. The pressure was agony, but it also meant his heart was still beating, still pumping blood that needed somewhere to go besides out the hole in his side. "You came back," Grant said stupidly. "Why did you come back?" "Because I'm tired of running," Lena said. Her hands were slick with his blood, her eyes bright with tears. "Because you're the only person in 14 years who's treated me like I'm worth something. Because if you die, I don't want to be alone again." Wade was moving, circling around toward them. Colt was down, but not out reaching for his fallen gun with his good hand. They had maybe seconds before this ended badly. "The satchel," Grant managed. "Get it. Run." "Not without you." "Lena, I said not without you." She hooked her arms under his shoulders and tried to lift him. Grant's vision exploded in stars of pain, but somehow he got his legs under him. Somehow he was standing leaning heavily on this slip of a girl who should never have had to be this strong. They stumbled toward the creek, Grant's feet dragging, leaving a trail of blood. Behind them, Wade shouted something, but Grant's ears were ringing too loud to make out the words. Lena was crying openly now, tears streaming down her face, as she half-carried, half-dragged him across the open ground. They reached the creek bank and tumbled down together, rolling through scrub brush and loose rocks. The fall reopened Grant's wound, and he felt fresh blood soaking through his shirt. But they were in cover now, hidden by the banks and the vegetation. Lena scrambled back up the bank and grabbed the satchel, which she'd somehow had the presence of mind to retrieve. Then she was sliding back down, ripping at Grant's shirt-wadding fabric and pressing it against the wound. "Don't die," she kept saying over and over like a prayer. "Don't die, don't die, don't die." "Trying not to," Grant said. His voice sounded far away to his own ears. "Not doing a great job, but I'm trying. Where's the nearest town besides the one Dalton controls?" "South, Twin Forks, maybe 8 miles. Grant's eyelids felt heavy. It would be so easy to close them, to let the darkness come. "Lena, if I don't—" "You will." "If I don't," he continued stubbornly, "there's a letter. In my cabin. Under the floorboard beneath the bed. It has names. People who owed my father money. People who owe me favors. Use them. Get somewhere safe." "We're both getting somewhere safe," Lena said fiercely. "Together. Now shut up and conserve your strength." Above them on the bank, Grant could hear the Brenner brothers talking in low voices. They were planning their next move, trying to figure out how to flush their quarry out. Grant tried to calculate odds and angles and came up with nothing good. Even if Lena could carry him, which she couldn't, they'd never make it 8 miles to Twin Forks, not with 2 armed men hunting them. Then the sound of hoofbeats, distant but getting closer. Multiple horses moving fast. Grant's heart sank. Reinforcements. Dalton had probably sent more men, and now they were surrounded. But the voice that called out wasn't Dalton's. "Wade Brenner, you're under arrest." Grant forced his eyes open, squinting against the sun. A group of riders appeared on the rise above the creek. 5 men, all armed, led by someone Grant didn't recognize. They weren't wearing badges, weren't in any kind of uniform, but they moved with military precision, surrounding the area, cutting off any escape. Wade shouted something defiant. There was a brief exchange of gunfire and then silence. Footsteps approaching, and Grant tensed, trying to position himself between Lena and whatever was coming. A face appeared at the top of the bank. William Garrett, looking considerably more alert than he had at dawn the previous day, holding a rifle and scanning the creek bed. When he spotted them, his expression softened. "Found them," he called over his shoulder. Then to Grant and Lena, "You two all right?" "He's been shot," Lena said. "He's losing blood." Garrett slid down the bank, followed by 2 other men. One of them was older, maybe 60, with a physician's bag. He knelt beside Grant and pulled away the makeshift bandage, his experienced eyes assessing the damage. "Went clean through," he said. "That's good. Missed the kidney, probably missed the intestines. You're lucky, son." "Don't feel lucky," Grant managed. "You're alive. That's all the luck you need." The doctor pulled supplies from his bag and started working. "This is going to hurt." He wasn't lying. Grant felt himself slipping away as the doctor probed the wound, cleaning it, packing it with something that burned like hellfire. Lena's hand found his squeezing tight, anchoring him to consciousness. He focused on that pressure, on the warmth of her skin, on the fact that she was alive and safe. When the doctor finished, Grant was drenched in sweat, and Lena's face was streaked with tears and blood. But the bleeding had slowed, and the doctor was nodding to himself with professional satisfaction. "He'll live," he announced. "Needs rest, clean water, and someone to change the dressings daily, but he'll live." "What about them?" Lena asked, gesturing toward where the Brenner brothers had been. "Colt's shoulder wound isn't serious. Wade gave up without a fight once he realized he was outnumbered." Garrett sat down heavily on a rock. "We've been watching you since yesterday. When we saw you ride out this morning, we followed at a distance. Good thing we did." "How did you—" Grant started. "Know you'd come here, I didn't, but I know Marcus Dalton and I know how he operates. Been tracking his men for the past week, waiting for them to make a move. When they headed this direction, I figured they were after you." Grant's head was spinning. "Why help us?" "Because Jacob Cartwright died trying to do something important. Because his daughter deserves better than to die in a creek bed. And because—" Garrett pulled out a piece of paper creased and yellowed with age. "Because your father destroyed my family too. Maybe not the same way he destroyed the Cartwrights, but he destroyed us. And I've been waiting 8 years for a chance to make things right." Lena held up the satchel. "We found them, the documents, everything my father collected." Garrett's eyes widened. "You're certain?" "Testimony supply manifests official letters. It's all there, proof of everything." She looked down at Grant. "Now, what do we do with it?" "Now we get you two somewhere safe. Then we figure out who to trust with this information." Garrett stood up and gestured to his companions. "There's a judge in Austin, federal appointment not beholden to the local power structure. If anyone will act on this evidence, it's him." "What about Dalton?" Grant asked. "He's not going to just let this go." "Dalton doesn't know what you found. Far as he's concerned, this was just his deputies trying to eliminate a problem. We take the Brenner brothers with us, keep them away from Dalton until we can get these documents to Austin." Garrett reached down and helped Grant to his feet. "Can you ride?" "Do I have a choice?" "Not really." They hauled Grant up the bank, an exercise in sustained agony that left him gasping, and loaded him onto one of the horses. Lena climbed up behind him, steadying him with her arms around his waist, and Grant leaned back against her, too tired and hurt to care about propriety. The ride back to Grant's ranch took hours. The doctor had given him something for the pain, but it only took the edge off, leaving him floating in a haze of discomfort and exhaustion. He drifted in and out of awareness, sometimes seeing the trail ahead, sometimes seeing nothing but darkness. When they finally reached the cabin, the sun was setting, painting everything in shades of gold and red. They carried Grant inside and laid him on the bed, his bed where Lena usually slept. The doctor checked his bandages, gave Lena instructions on how to care for the wound, and left bottles of medicine with strict orders about dosage. Garrett posted 2 men outside as guards, then came inside to talk. "We'll stay the night, head for Austin at first light. You should come with us, both of you." "I can't ride 8 hours in my condition," Grant pointed out. "Then we'll get a wagon. Take 2 days instead of 1. But you can't stay here. Dalton's going to figure out eventually that something went wrong, and when he does, this ranch is the first place he'll look." Lena looked at Grant, a question in her eyes. He knew what she was asking. This place, it was the only home he'd had since leaving his father's house. It was small and poor and barely functional, but it was his. Leaving it meant abandoning everything he'd built, but staying meant dying. And more importantly, staying meant Lena dying. "We'll go," Grant said. "Give us tonight to pack." After Garrett left, Lena sat on the edge of the bed, studying Grant's face in the lamplight. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. "Put yourself between me and those bullets. You could have run." "No," Grant said. "I couldn't, not again. I ran once, Lana. Stood by and did nothing while your family died. I wasn't going to do it twice. You almost died. Better than living with myself if something happened to you." Lena's hand found his, their fingers interlacing. "I thought you were dead. When you went down when I saw the blood, I thought you were dead, and it was my fault for dragging you into this. This isn't your fault, none of it. Not what happened to your family, not today, none of it." Grant squeezed her hand weakly. "You're the bravest person I've ever met. Coming back like that, standing up to armed men carrying me when you barely have the strength to stand yourself. Your father would be proud." Tears spilled down Lena's cheeks. "I was so scared. I've never been that scared in my life. Not even before. But you did it anyway. That's what courage is. Not the absence of fear, but doing what needs to be done despite it." They sat in silence for a while, Grant drifting at the edge of sleep, Lena watching over him. Finally, she spoke again. "That kiss," she said, "before I ran. I just want you to know it wasn't just for luck." Grant's eyes opened. No, I needed you to know that I don't hate you anymore. That somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing you as your father's son and started seeing you as just you. Lena, I'm not saying I forgive everything. I'm not saying it's all fine now, but I'm saying you're not the enemy anymore. She struggled for words. "You're the person who gave me back my name, who showed me my family's graves, who almost died to keep me safe. And that means something." Grant reached up with his good hand and touched her face, wiping away tears. "It means everything," he said softly. She leaned down and kissed him again, gentle this time, careful of his injuries. When she pulled back, she was smiling despite the tears. "Don't die on me, Grant McCade," she said. "We've got too much left to do. We've got to get these documents to Austin. We've got to make sure everyone knows what happened. We've got to make sure my father's death meant something." "We will," Grant promised. "All of it, together." Lena nodded and stood up. "I'm going to pack. You rest. Doctor's orders." She moved around the cabin, gathering supplies, packing what little they owned. Grant watched her through half-closed eyes, this fierce young woman who'd survived everything the world threw at her and somehow came out the other side still fighting. Outside, night fell completely. Garrett's men kept watch alert for any signs of trouble. Inside, Grant finally let himself slip into real sleep, knowing that for the first time in weeks, maybe the first time in years, he wasn't alone. Tomorrow they would ride for Austin. Tomorrow they would take Jacob Cartwright's evidence to someone who could use it. Tomorrow they would start the process of bringing 8 years of injustice into the light. But tonight, they rested. Tonight they let themselves believe that maybe, just maybe, redemption was possible after all. Morning came with the sound of wagon wheels and low voices. Grant woke to find pale sunlight streaming through the window and Lena asleep in the chair beside his bed, her head tilted at an angle that would leave her neck sore. She still held his hand even in sleep, her fingers wrapped around his like she was afraid he'd disappear if she let go. He watched her for a moment, this woman who'd been through hell and somehow found the strength to pull him out of his own. Her face was softer and sleep younger, and Grant could see traces of the little girl she'd been before the world broke her. The girl who'd chased butterflies and climbed trees and given dandelions to stupid boys who didn't deserve them. "You're staring," Lena said without opening her eyes. "Can't help it. You snore." Her eyes flew open and she sat up straight, indignant. "I do not snore." "Like a sawmill, suck," Grant said, fighting a smile. "Woke me up twice." Lena swatted his shoulder carefully, avoiding his injury, and stood up, stretching. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got shot," Grant admitted. "But better than last night. The doctor knows his business. He said the wound looks clean. No infection yet, but we need to watch it." Lena moved to the window and peered out. "Garrett's got a wagon ready. He wants to leave within the hour." Grant tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Pain lanced through his side, sharp and hot, stealing his breath. Lena was there instantly, helping him, propping pillows behind his back. "Easy," she said. "You lost a lot of blood. You need to take it slow." "Don't have time to take it slow. Dalton could show up any minute. Then we'll deal with him. But you pushing yourself and tearing those stitches open won't help anyone." She pressed a cup of water into his hands. "Drink, doctor's orders." Grant drank, realizing how thirsty he was. While he did, Lena checked his bandages, her fingers gentle but efficient. She'd changed sometime during the night, wearing one of his shirts over her dress, the sleeves rolled up to her elbows. Somewhere along the way, she'd stopped looking like a victim and started looking like a survivor. "All this time," Grant said, watching her work, "I thought I was supposed to save you, but you're the one who saved me yesterday." "We saved each other," Lena corrected. "That's how it works, isn't it? When you care about someone." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Grant opened his mouth to respond, but a knock at the door interrupted him. Garrett entered, hat in hand, looking like a man who hadn't slept much either. "Morning," he said. "How's the patient?" "Alive," Grant replied. "That's about all I can say for myself." "That's enough for now." Garrett glanced at Lena, then back to Grant. "We need to talk about what happens next." "We take the documents to Austin," Lena said. "You said there's a judge, Judge Harold Morrison, federal appointee, honest as they come. But getting to him won't be simple." Garrett pulled up the other chair and sat down heavily. "Dalton's going to know something went wrong when the Brenner brothers don't report back. He'll have men watching the roads, checking travelers. We can't just ride into Austin with you two and expect to waltz into the courthouse." "So what do you suggest?" Grant asked. "Split up. My men and I take the documents to Austin directly. You two take a different route, meet us there in a few days once things settle down." "No," Lena said immediately. "Those documents stay with us. My father died for them. I'm not letting them out of my sight. Even if keeping them with you puts you in more danger. Especially then." Lena's jaw set in a stubborn line Grant was learning to recognize. "They're my responsibility. My family's legacy. I'm seeing this through." Garrett looked to Grant for help, but Grant just shrugged or tried to the motion limited by his injury. "She's right. If we're going to do this, we do it together, all the way through." "You're both fools," Garrett said, but there was respect in his voice. "Brave fools, but fools nonetheless." He stood up and moved to the window, looking out at the brightening day. "All right. We'll do it your way. But we travel armed and we travel careful. At the first sign of trouble, you do exactly what I say." "Agreed." "Agreed," Grant and Lena said in unison. The next hour was a flurry of activity. Garrett's men loaded the wagon with supplies while Lena packed the last of their belongings. Grant tried to help and was firmly told to sit down and stay out of the way. By the time the sun was fully up, they were ready to leave. Grant took one last look at the cabin before they pulled away. It wasn't much rough wood and rougher memories, but it had been his. A place where he'd tried to build something honest, something separate from his father's legacy. Now he was leaving it behind, possibly forever, and the weight of that settled on his chest like a stone. "You'll come back," Lena said quietly, reading his thoughts. After this is over, after we've done what needs doing, we'll come back. Maybe, Grant said. Or maybe we'll find somewhere new, somewhere that doesn't have so many ghosts. I'd like that, Lena admitted. A fresh start. No past, no guilt, just forward. The wagon rolled out, flanked by Garrett's men on horseback. Grant lay in the back on a bed of blankets, Lena beside him, the satchel of documents tucked between them. Every bump in the road was agony, but Grant gritted his teeth and said nothing. They had hours of travel ahead, and complaining wouldn't make it any shorter. They took back roads and game trails, avoiding the main routes where Dalton's men might be watching. The going was slow, the wagon creaking and groaning over rough terrain. Around noon, they stopped to rest the horses and eat a cold meal of jerky and hardtack. Grant managed to stand with Lena's help, needing to move to prove to himself that he could. They walked a short distance from the wagon out to where a rocky outcrop overlooked the valley below. From here, they could see for miles rolling hills covered in scrub, the occasional stand of trees, and far in the distance, the hazy outline of mountains. "It's beautiful," Lena said. "I'd forgotten how beautiful it could be. When you're just trying to survive, you stop seeing things like beauty." "I know what you mean," Grant said. "Spent so long looking down, watching my feet, making sure I didn't stumble. Forgot to look up." They stood in companionable silence, watching a hawk circle overhead. Finally, Lena spoke again, her voice soft. "What happens after? After we give the documents to this judge? After people know the truth? What happens to us?" "I don't know," Grant admitted. "Haven't thought that far ahead. Been too busy trying to make sure there is an after. We'll start thinking about it, because I need something to hold on to. Some kind of future that doesn't involve running or hiding or waiting for the next bad thing to happen." Grant turned to look at her. Really look at her. The sun caught in her dark hair, turning it bronze where it wasn't black. Her profile was sharp against the sky, all angles and determination. She was beautiful, he realized, not in spite of what she'd been through, but because of it. She'd been forged in fire and come out steel. "I want land," he said. "Not much, just enough to run some cattle, grow some crops. Somewhere north, maybe. Colorado or Montana, where there's water, and the winters are hard, but the summers make up for it." "I want a garden," Lena said. "A big one with vegetables and flowers, and a tree I can sit under when the work's done. I want to grow things, watch them bloom, prove that not everything has to die. I want mornings where we wake up, and the biggest decision is what to have for breakfast. I want to learn to read properly. My mother taught me some, but I've forgotten most of it. I want to read books and newspapers and know what's happening in the world." "I'll teach you," Grant promised. "I'm not much of a scholar, but I can read well enough. We'll work through it together." Lena smiled, and it transformed her face. Together. I like the sound of that. They walked back to the wagon, hand in hand, and Grant felt something shift inside him. Hope, maybe. The fragile belief that maybe they really could have those things, the land, the garden, the quiet mornings, that maybe the past didn't have to define the future. By late afternoon, they'd covered maybe 15 miles. Not much, but enough to put distance between them and Dalton's territory. They made camp in a small canyon where a spring provided fresh water and the walls offered protection. Garrett posted guards while the rest of them set up tents and started a fire. The doctor checked Grant's wound and declared it healing well, though he cautioned against too much movement. "You're young and strong," he said. "That's working in your favor. But infection can set in fast. Keep it clean, change the dressing twice a day, and for God's sake, don't do anything stupid." "Too late for that," Grant said. "I got shot protecting some documents I can't even read properly." "You got shot protecting her," the doctor corrected, nodding toward where Lena was helping prepare dinner. "That's not stupid. That's what decent men do." That night, they sat around the fire, 8 people bound together by circumstance and shared purpose. Garrett told stories about the war, about Jacob Cartwright's bravery and conviction. The other men shared their own memories, painting a picture of a man who'd believed deeply in justice and had been willing to die for it. Lena listened with tears streaming down her face, learning about her father through other people's eyes. When the stories finally wound down, she spoke for the first time since they'd started. "Thank you," she said simply, "for remembering him, for not letting him be forgotten. That's what these documents are for. Garrett said, gesturing to the satchel that Lena kept always within arm's reach. So everyone remembers. So the truth doesn't die with the people who lived it. They slept in shifts, guards keeping watch for any sign of pursuit. Grant and Lena shared a tent lying side by side on bedrolls, not quite touching, but close enough to feel each other's warmth. "Are you scared?" Lena whispered into the darkness. "Terrified," Grant admitted. "Every moment of every day. But I'm more scared of going back to how things were, living half a life carrying guilt like a stone, never moving forward." "Me too. I was so angry for so long. Angry at the world, at God, at everyone who kept living while my family died. But anger's exhausting. It takes everything and gives nothing back." "So what do you feel now?" Lena was quiet for a long moment. "Hope, maybe. The scared, fragile kind that feels like it might shatter if you breathe wrong. But it's there. And that's more than I've had in 14 years. Grant reached out in the darkness and found her hand. She squeezed back and they lay there listening to the night sounds, crickets chirping, the fire crackling, someone snoring softly in another tent. "Grant," Lena said, her voice drowsy with approaching sleep. "Yeah. Thank you for buying me, for taking me home, for everything." "Thank you for not shooting me when you had the chance," Grant replied. "Would have been justified." Lena laughed softly. "Don't think I didn't consider it." They fell asleep like that, hands clasped, breathing synchronized, two broken people finding wholeness in each other. The next 2 days passed in a blur of travel and rest, Grant's strength slowly returning, Lena growing more confident with each mile they put between themselves and Brazos County. They talked about everything and nothing, childhood memories, favorite foods, dreams for the future, getting to know each other not as victim and guilty party, but as people with their own stories and scars. On the third morning, they crested a hill and saw Austin spread out below them. It was bigger than Grant had expected, a real city with brick buildings and paved streets and the imposing dome of the Capitol building rising above it all. "There it is," Garrett said, reining up beside the wagon. "Our destination, and hopefully the beginning of justice." They rode into town, carefully aware that Dalton's reach might extend even here. Garrett led them not to the courthouse, but to a modest house on the outskirts where a man in his 60s with silver hair and kind eyes answered the door. "Judge Morrison," Garrett said, "Wasi sis, we need to talk." The judge took one look at Grant's bandaged side, at Lena's haunted eyes, at the weathered satchel she clutched like a lifeline, and stepped aside. "Come in, all of you." They crowded into the judge's study, a room lined with law books and smelling of pipe tobacco and old paper. Morrison listened without interrupting as Garrett explained everything: Jacob Cartwright's investigation, the documents hidden for 8 years, Dalton's attempt to silence anyone who might reveal the truth. When Garrett finished, the judge turned to Lena. "May I see the documents?" Lena hesitated, then carefully opened the satchel and laid the papers on the desk. Morrison went through them methodically, his expression growing graver with each page. When he finally looked up, his face was pale. "This is explosive," he said quietly. "War crimes, corruption, systematic abuse of power. If even half of this holds up in court, it'll bring down some of the most powerful men in Texas." "Will you act on it?" Grant asked. "Or is it too old, too inconvenient?" Morrison's eyes flashed. "Justice isn't about convenience, young man. It's about truth. And this," he gestured to the documents, "this is truth that's been buried too long." He stood up and moved to his window, looking out at the city. "But I won't lie to you. This will be dangerous. The men named here won't go quietly. They'll fight, use every resource they have. You'll need protection, safe places to stay, and you'll need to testify." "I'll do it," Lena said immediately. "Whatever it takes." "As will I," Grant added. "My father's name is in those documents. He needs to be held accountable, even in death." Morrison nodded slowly. "Then we begin. But first, you both need rest, medical care, and time to prepare. This won't happen overnight. Building a case like this takes months, maybe years." "Years?" Lena's face fell. "But Dalton's still out there, still in power." "Not for long," Morrison promised. "I can have him removed from his position within a week pending investigation. He'll have no authority, no badge to hide behind. That's something at least." It wasn't enough, not really. But it was a start, and sometimes a start was all you could ask for. The next weeks passed in a blur of depositions and testimonies. Morrison brought in federal marshals' men not beholden to local power structures to provide protection. Grant and Lena were moved to a safe house guarded around the clock, while Morrison built his case piece by careful piece. Slowly, news began to spread. A newspaper in Houston picked up the story, then one in San Antonio. The federal government took interest sending investigators. Men whose names appeared in Jacob Cartwright's documents began to disappear, some fleeing to Mexico, others turning themselves in and begging for leniency. Marcus Dalton was arrested on a quiet Tuesday morning, taken from his office in chains while the whole town watched. He maintained his innocence, claimed the documents were forgeries, but the evidence was too strong and too detailed. Within a month, he was in federal custody awaiting trial. Through it all, Grant healed. The wound in his side closed left a scar that would ache in cold weather, but didn't slow him down. He spent his days in the safe house reading to Lena, teaching her letters and words, watching her confidence grow as whole new worlds opened up to her. "Listen to this," Lena said one afternoon, struggling through a paragraph from a dime novel. The hero rode into town at sunset. His gun hung low on his hip, and his eyes searched for justice. "Vengeance," Grant corrected gently, looking over her shoulder at the page. His eyes searched for vengeance. "Right, vengeance." Lena sounded out the word carefully. "Why do they always want vengeance? Why not justice?" "Because vengeance makes for better stories," Grant said. "Justice is slow and complicated and doesn't usually end with dramatic shootouts." "I prefer justice," Lena decided, "even if it's slow." 6 months after they'd ridden into Austin, the trials began. Grant and Lena testified, telling their stories in packed courtrooms where every word was recorded, every detail examined. It was exhausting and often painful, reliving the past, exposing old wounds to public scrutiny. But it was also cathartic. Every time Lena spoke her father's name in court, every time she detailed what had been done to her family, she was reclaiming a piece of herself that had been stolen. And every time Grant admitted his own complicity, his own failure to act, he was cutting away another piece of the guilt that had weighed him down for 8 years. The verdict, when it came, was swift and decisive. Dalton was found guilty on 12 counts of murder conspiracy and abuse of power. He was sentenced to hang along with 3 other men whose names had appeared in Jacob Cartwright's documents. Grant and Lena didn't attend the execution. By then they were already gone from Austin, heading north with a wagon full of supplies and a land deed in Grant's pocket. They'd sold his ranch, couldn't go back there, too many bad memories, and used the money to buy property in Colorado in a valley where a river ran year-round and the mountains stood like sentinels against the sky. They arrived in late spring when everything was green and growing. The land came with a small cabin that needed work and 200 acres of possibility. It wasn't much, but it was theirs, bought with honest money and far from the shadows of the past. On their first morning, Grant woke to find Lena already outside, standing in the spot where she'd decided her garden would go. The sun was just coming up, painting the mountains gold, and she stood with her face turned toward the light, arms outstretched like she was embracing the day. Grant joined her, slipping his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" "Everything," Lena said. "Nothing. How we got here, how it almost didn't happen, how many times we could have died or given up or let the darkness win. But we didn't. No, we didn't." She turned in his arms to face him, and Grant saw tears on her cheeks, but they weren't sad tears. "We're going to be happy here, aren't we?" "We're going to try," Grant promised. "That's all anyone can do. Try and keep trying and not give up, even when it's hard." "I can do that," Lena said. "I've done harder things." They started working on the cabin, repairing the roof, replacing rotted boards, making it into a home. In the evenings, they sat on the porch and watched the sunset paint the sky in colors that seemed impossible, reds and oranges and purples so vivid they looked painted on. They talked about what crops to plant, where to build the barn, whether they should get chickens first or a milk cow. One evening, about 2 months after they'd arrived, Grant came back from checking the fence line to find Lena kneeling in her garden plot. She'd marked it out with stakes and string, and now she was pressing seeds into the dark earth with her fingers, her lips moving in what might have been a prayer, or might have been a conversation with ghosts. "What are you planting?" Grant asked, kneeling beside her. "Everything," Lena said. "Tomatoes and squash and beans, flowers too, sunflowers and black-eyed Susans and whatever else will grow. I want color, Grant. I want to look out the window and see life everywhere." "Then that's what we'll have," Grant said. He picked up a handful of seeds and started planting alongside her, their hands moving in rhythm, creating something together. That night, as they lay in bed listening to the river rushing over rocks outside, Lena rolled over to face him. "I need to tell you something." Grant's heart clenched. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Just the opposite, really." She took a breath. "I've been scared to say this, scared to jinx it or make it too real. But I need you to know I love you, Grant McCade. Not because you saved me or because I owe you or because there's nobody else. I love you because of who you are, because you owned your mistakes and tried to be better, because you gave me space to heal and time to choose, because when I needed someone to believe in me, you were there." Grant felt his throat tighten with emotion. "I love you too. Have for a while now, I think. Maybe since that first night when you told me you hated me and I thought, fair enough. You're the strongest person I know, Lena. The bravest. And I don't know what I did to deserve you, but I'm grateful for it every single day." "You bought me for $23, Lena said, a smile playing at her lips. "Best money you ever spent." "Best money I ever spent," Grant agreed. He pulled her close, careful of old injuries that still sometimes ached, and kissed her forehead. "We're going to make it, you know. Really make it. This life we're building, it's going to be good." "I know," Lena whispered against his chest. "I can feel it. Like the future is something real for the first time, not just surviving until tomorrow, but actually living." They fell asleep tangled together, and in the morning Grant woke to find sunlight streaming through the window and Lena already up standing at the stove making coffee. She was humming something under her breath, no recognizable tune, just a sound of contentment. Grant lay there watching her, this woman who'd been sold and broken and nearly destroyed, but who'd somehow found her way back to joy. He thought about his father, about Jacob Cartwright, about all the people whose choices had led them to this moment. The pain and the guilt would never fully go away. Some scars ran too deep, but they didn't have to define everything. They could coexist with happiness, with hope, with the quiet satisfaction of building something good from the wreckage of what came before. "Coffee's ready," Lena called, turning to smile at him. "And I was thinking, what if we ride into town today, see about getting married? No big ceremony, just us and a minister and the promise to keep choosing each other." Grant sat up, his heart suddenly racing. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious. I've been owned, Grant, been property, been nothing. But I want to choose to belong to you and have you choose to belong to me, not because of guilt or debt or anything we owe the past, just because we want to." Grant was across the room in 3 strides, pulling her into his arms, kissing her like she was air, and he'd been drowning. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "Yes," he said, "today, now, whenever you want. The answer is yes." They rode into the small town of Cedar Ridge that afternoon, both scrubbed clean and wearing their best clothes, which weren't fancy but were honest. The minister was a kind old man who asked no questions about their past, just smiled and spoke the words that bound them together. When it was over, when they'd signed the papers and exchanged simple gold bands that Grant had bought from the general store, they stood outside the church and looked at each other as husband and wife. "Mrs. McCade," Grant said, testing out the words. "Lena McCade," she replied and laughed. "That's going to take some getting used to." "We've got time," Grant said. "All the time in the world." They rode back to their land as the sun was setting, painting their future in gold light. That night they celebrated quietly, just the two of them, and the promise of tomorrow. And when they finally slept, it was with the certainty that whatever came next, whatever challenges or hardships or moments of joy, they would face it together. The past had taken so much from both of them, but it had also led them to this moment, to this place, to each other. And maybe that was what redemption really looked like, not erasing what came before, but learning to live with it, to grow around it like a tree grows around a wound, incorporating it into your story without letting it define every chapter. In the years that followed, they would build their ranch into something thriving. Lena's garden would bloom every summer, a riot of colors that visitors would come from miles to see. Grant would teach local children to read and write, passing on the gift that he and Lena had shared. They would have children of their own, eventually 3 of them, who would grow up hearing stories about their grandfather Jacob, about his fight for justice, about how truth mattered, even when it cost everything. But all of that was still to come. For now, in this moment, they were simply Grant and Lena McCade, 2 people who'd found each other in the darkness and chosen to walk toward the light together. They had a small cabin, a growing garden, and each other. In the Wild West of 1874, in a valley in Colorado where the river ran clear and the mountains stood eternal, that was more than enough. That was everything. Because redemption doesn't come easy, and forgiveness is a journey measured in years, not moments. But sometimes if you're brave enough to face your past, and strong enough to choose your future, you find that healing is possible after all. And sometimes even the most broken souls find their way home.